Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all their support. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in from the Commander's Quarters studio. Welcome to the show. So, the custom Magic community is at it again, designing some amazing custom commanders. So on today's episode, I'm going to take you through those commanders, and who knows, maybe even wizards could take some notes and learn a thing or two from these. Anyways, let's jump into it. First up, we've got Avara, Agury Master from Amish Nerd. She's a 2/2 human wizard that costs blue, black, green. She has whenever you scry, you may also look at the top card of an opponent's library, then you may put that card on the bottom of their library. And parlay, tap, each player reveals the top card of their library. For each non-land card revealed this way, that player loses 2 life and you create a 1/1 blue bird creature token with flying, then each player draws a card. So there's actually a good amount of things going on with this commander, so let's break it down. First off, basically whenever you scry, you fate seal. Fate sealing is essentially scrying for your opponent. So you're going to work to make suboptimal decisions for them. If they're flooded with lands already, congratulations, you get another land. Or if it's a spell that might be useless at the time, they're going to get that. Regardless, this can work in tandem with that parlay ability. Having knowledge of that top card is definitely going to impact what you do. You can make your opponents draw some useless cards, make them lose life, and create some birds. And keep in mind that this impacts you as well. Regardless, the direction that I would take this deck is a control build. You want to fate seal your opponents again and again and again to make sure that they're not drawing in anything that you don't want them to. So to do this, we need plenty of ways to scry. And repeatable ways to scry are going to be fantastic for this deck, such as Eyes Everywhere, Jace's Sanctum, and Shadows of the Past. Eyes Everywhere says at the beginning of your upkeep, scry 1. On top of that, you can pay 5 and a blue to exchange control of it with another target non-lane permanent. Again, being able to scry each upkeep not only helps you, but it helps you fate seal one opponent. And then Jace's Sanctum says, instant sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, and whenever you cast an instant sorcery spell, scry 1. This can really help fate seal multiple opponents if you've got a spell that scries. And Shadows of the Past can be huge in this deck. It says whenever a creature dies, scry 1. There are going to be plenty of creatures dying throughout the game, so that's a lot of fate seals. And a kind of card that comes in huge in this deck is Lantern of Insight. It says each player plays with the top card of their library revealed. So essentially this gives you perfect information on what people are going to draw and what you can fate seal. Knowing always who to target when you scry is huge. Other cards that we want to add in this deck are going to involve mass discard like Delirium Skies. For 2 and a black, it makes each player discard 3 cards. That's a huge amount, especially when we're forcing players to draw into bad cards. And perhaps an even more brutal card for this deck is Notion Thief. It says if an opponent would draw a card except for the first one that they draw on each of their draw steps, instead that player skips that draw and you draw a card. So now when we parlay, our opponents still get all the negatives that come with that, but we get to draw all their cards. So that can be an incredible amount of value just for tapping our commander. And some other types of cards to consider for this deck are Cerulean Wisps, Second Harvest, and Favorable Winds. Cerulean Wisp is going to untap our commander and draw us a card. So this is a cheap cantrip that can let us parlay again. And then Second Harvest says for each token you control, create a token that's a copy of that permanent. So this can double up the number of birds that we control. And Favorable Winds can make those birds even deadlier by giving creatures we control with flying +1/+1. So with Avara, we're going to fate seal our opponents, make them draw into bad cards, and then just take over with some birds. But now let's move on to Avas Comb, a Turtle Debtor from Bubbly Penguin. Avas is a 2/5 human advisor that costs 2 white-black. Avas has at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, they may put a debt counter on target non-token creature they control without a debt counter. If they do, they create a treasure token. If they don't, you create a treasure token. And then whenever a creature with a debt counter dies, you may exile it. If you do, create a token that's a copy of that creature, except it's a 1/1 and it's a spirit into its other types. So essentially with this commander, we force our opponents to make a tough choice. Then get some temporary mana advantage by creating a treasure, but at the price of giving us one of their creatures later. Granted, that creature just can be a 1/1, but if it's got some ETBs or abilities, we can take advantage of those. If they choose not to put a debt counter on any of their creatures, then we get a treasure. And that number of treasures can really add up throughout the game, so this can generate us a ton of mana or give us a lot of creatures. Again, I think this is a really unique commander that leads to a lot of interesting decision points for our opponents. Regardless, some of the cards that I would consider for this deck would be Disciple of the Vault, Marionette Master, and Clock of Omens. Because of all the treasures that are going to be thrown around, we want some ways to benefit from them. Disciple of the Vault says, whenever an artifact is put into a graveyard from play, you may have target opponent lose 1 life. So now when anyone sacrifices a treasure, we get to make someone lose 1. And then Marionette Master cares about our treasures, but in a bigger way. She has Fabricate 3, and whenever an artifact you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, target opponent loses life equal to Marionette Master's power. So say she's up to 4 power, whenever we sacrifice a treasure, we drain someone for 4. And then Clock of Omens has tap 2 untapped artifacts you control, untap target artifact. This can actually turn our treasures into pseudo mana rocks. If we have a mana rock in play, we can utilize our treasures to untap that mana rock for mana. But when our opponents do put debt counters on their creatures, we want some ways to destroy those creatures. So one-sided board wipes like Fell the Mighty, Dusk to Dawn, and Solar Tide can come in huge. Fell the Mighty says destroy all creatures with power greater than target creature's power. And then Dusk says destroy all creatures with power 3 or greater. Solar Tide says choose 1 destroy all creatures with power 2 or less, or destroy all creatures with power 3 or greater. Essentially, these are ways to keep our small creatures alive, including our commander, and to wipe out our opponent's creatures. Or at the very least, most of them. And then when our opponent's creatures die and come back as 1/1 tokens for us, we can make them even better with things like Intangible Virtue and Dictate of Heliod. Intangible Virtue gives creature tokens we control +1/+1 in Vigilance, and Dictate of Heliod gives all creatures we control +2/+2. And of course, we can win with some draining effects like Zulaport Cutthroat to take advantage of all the creatures that we have in case they die. Overall, this is a very interesting commander that cares about treasures and tokens. And again, the creatures that we essentially steal might get smaller, but they can still have really impactful effects. But next up, let's move on to Torrence Ever Ascending from Arya though. Torrence is a 2/2 bird soldier with flying and first strike that costs white-blue. He has whenever another creature with flying enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 1 life and scry 1. And whenever a creature you control with flying deals combat damage to a player, you may exile it, then return to the battlefield under its owner's control. So Torrence can generate you a lot of value. The more creatures that have flying that come into play under your control, the more life that you gain and the more times that you scry. Then you can really abuse any LTBs or ETBs with that combat trigger. So while making a ton of flying tokens gives you a lot of life and helps you scry a lot, that second part won't help you out with that. Because again, if you try to blink a token, it's not coming back. So this commander has a pretty simple build, but a very powerful one. You're going to want to run an incredible amount of flyers with ETBs. So first up, let's talk about Cloud Blazer, which is going to gain you 2 life and draw you 2 cards when it comes into play. And again, remember that thanks to your commander, you get to gain 1 life and scry first. And blinking this on every single one of your turns is going to be an absurd amount of value. Speaking of value, we're also going to be running Diluvian Primordial. When it enters the battlefield for each opponent, you may cast up to 1 target instant or sorcery card from that player's graveyard without paying its mana cost. If a card cast this way will be put into a graveyard this turn, exile instead. Getting 3 free spells every turn seems pretty good. And so does getting rid of 3 creatures with Angel of Serenity. When she enters the battlefield, you may exile up to 3 other target creatures from the battlefield and or creature cards from graveyards. And then when she leaves the battlefield, return the exile card to their owner's hands. So this kind of can be a delayed bounce or a way to get creatures back from your graveyard. And although we probably don't want too many spells that make tokens, we can have some creatures that can. Belfry Spirit has Haunt, and when it comes into play or the creature it haunts is put into a graveyard, put 2 1/1 black bat creature tokens with flying into play. Again, the more flyers that come into play, the more times that we scry, the more life that we gain. Speaking of life gain, we're also going to be running Archon of Redemption. It says whenever it or another creature with flying enters the battlefield under your control, you may gain life equal to that creature's power. So by blinking all of our creatures with flying, we're going to be gaining an absurd amount of life with this every single turn. And then Flicker Wisp can also be a very flexible card in this deck that can come in huge. When it enters the battlefield, exile another target permanent, return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. So we can utilize an ETB further with this if we need to. With all the scrying though, we can also utilize some flyers that deal with the top of the library. The Djinn of Wishes enters the battlefield with 3 wish counters on it, and by paying 2 blue we can remove a wish counter from it. When we do, we reveal the top card of our library, and we can play that card without paying its mana cost. If we don't, we exile it. So thanks to all of our scrying, we can set ourselves up for a huge spell with this. And then Arbiter the Ideal has Inspired. Whenever it becomes untapped, reveal the top card of your library. If it's an artifact, creature, or land card, you may put it onto the battlefield with a manifestation counter on it. That permanent is an enchantment in addition to its other types. So this essentially lets us cast things off the top for free. And then God Eternal Covenant says you reveal the first card you draw each turn as you draw it. Whenever you reveal an instant or sorcery card this way, copy that card and you may cast the copy. That copy costs 2 less to cast. So we can scry to set ourselves up with a right spell with this. But the final commander that I want to talk about today is Garrel Crypt Captain from Very Funny Valentine. Garrel is a 3/4 human knight with vigilance that costs white, black, green. It says creature cards in your graveyard can't be the targets of spells or abilities your opponents control. And whenever a creature card leaves your graveyard, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So this can somewhat protect your graveyard, and it benefits you whenever creatures leave it. And Garrel is in some great colors for self-mill. So we're going to fill our graveyard up with creatures and then take those creatures out. So first up, let's talk about some creatures that help mill us with Eye Collector, Milliken, and Splinter Fright. Whenever Eye Collector deals combat damage to a player, each player puts the top card of their library into their graveyard. Eye Collector has flying, so generally can get through on at least 1 player. And then Milliken has tap with the top card of your library into your graveyard and colors to your mana pool. So this mills us and helps ramps us as well. And Splinter Fright's power and toughness are each equal to the number of creature cards in our graveyard, and at the beginning of our upkeep, we put the top 2 cards of our library into our graveyard. So we get to keep milling too and making it bigger in the process. Now, after we fill our graveyard with creatures, we can cast something like Empty the Catacombs. It says each player returns all creature cards from their graveyard to their hand. Again, say that we have 10 creatures in our graveyard, that's going to drain our opponents for 10. Or we can cast something like Living Death, which says each player exiles creature cards from their graveyard, then sacrifices all creatures they control, then puts all the cards exiled this way onto the battlefield. So basically we can take over the game with our giant graveyard creature army. Or we can do some more targeted creature graveyard removal with something like Woe Strider. When it comes into play, we get a goat token, and we can also sacrifice creatures to scry 1. On top of that, it's got Escape for 3 black by exiling 4 of their cards from our graveyard. So on top of it being a great sacrifice outlet, we can also use it to exile specific creatures. And when we're sacrificing creatures, we can cause even more pain to our opponents with something like Poison Tip Archer. It says whenever another creature dies, each opponent loses 1 life. But a card that works even better with our commander is Sir Conrad the Grim. It says when another creature dies or a creature card is put into a graveyard from anywhere other than the battlefield or a creature card leaves your graveyard, Sir Conrad the Grim deals 1 damage to each opponent. So this can dish out a ton of damage with this kind of a deck. And even something like Epicure of Blood can work fantastically with our commander. It says whenever you gain life, each opponent loses 1 life. Because we're going to be gaining life whenever we drain our opponents, this is going to drain them for basically double. And with that, this show is coming to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what your favorite of these are. Which custom commander would you most want to build a deck around? So yeah, let me know in the comments below, and as always, thanks again and have a good one.